For this video, I want to talk about nicotine use. Basically, what it is, the pros and cons of using it, and the personal experiences I've had with using it. So, if you don't know, nicotine is the psychoactive compound found in the tobacco plant, and it is also found as the psychoactive compound within many vape juices of today's modern generation. You know, people are trying to convert to vaping rather than smoking cigarettes as a more healthy alternative. You know, you've probably heard of nicotine. It's a stimulant. It's most commonly inhaled to produce that stimulant effect it gives, where it kind of lowers your blood pressure, releases adrenaline and dopamine, and kind of like a concoction of things like that. And it's also mentally and physiologically addictive, meaning that, say something like cannabis, you work yourself into that addiction psychologically or mentally, where you kind of convince yourself you need it. But something like nicotine, after prolonged exposure, it rewires kind of how your brain is working, and after a long period of time without using it, you will begin to experience withdrawal symptoms like sadness and irritability, and almost just this drive to go back to nicotine, use it directly. Sometimes people don't exactly associate that feeling with not having nicotine, which could be honestly be dangerous if you don't know that the way you're feeling is because you're addicted to nicotine. But many people recognize that when they're feeling like that, it's because they haven't had their nicotine in a while. So now I want to talk about how I began using nicotine. So I started using nicotine, like, I'd say 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago is when I kind of really started. There were two scenarios. I was hanging out with a group of friends that, at the time, it was kind of like a common thing to have those big box mods and get the big clouds. And at the time, it wasn't. We were staying away from the nicotine vape juices. Like, oh, you got the 6 milligram. That's gross. You know, I like the 3 mil or the 0 or whatever. But over time, it began to transition about like how cool your box mod looked, or what flavor your juice was, to like how much nicotine you were getting in the hits, and like how much nic was in your juice, and like how tiny it could be and give you the biggest buzz and stuff like that. And not only to mention that transition, but I began working in a kitchen. I don't anymore, but I had started working in a kitchen, and I've heard it before that if you work in a kitchen, you're more likely to get addicted to something, you know, something. And obviously everybody in there was smoking cigarettes and vaping and all this and that, and it was like their break thing. Like, they'd go on break, and it was for that. And I started like, I'd go out on my break and people would be using it, and I'd take a few hits off of it and get that rush feeling. And I started to like that feeling. I started to associate it with like kind of like a quick high at work. Like, I was never really into smoking cannabis on the clock, but nicotine, it was like this energizer, this immediate smoked energizer. And I remember I began just always asking the same guy, yo, can I hit your jewel, can I hit your jewel, over and over and over again. And at one point he just ended up being like, you know what, bro, you ask me all the time for this jewel, just take it. And I was like, oh shit, now I have to get pods, right? That's how I thought in my head. Like, now that I have this jewel, all I need to do is get the pods. Like, I don't need to buy the whole set. So that was like the spiraling effect of what got me on board with being physiologically addicted to nicotine, where I'm just constantly using it. But I'd have to say that nicotine and tobacco partially coincided with my I guess shamanic and philosophical aspects of myself, where I like to use tobacco itself to kind of go into this state, this trance state, similar but not to cannabis, where if you've ever smoked any amount of tobacco, you know the feeling it brings about, that lowering in blood pressure and that kind of dizzying, slight euphoric rush it gives you. Well, I've been intrigued with using that in meditative kind of contexts. And as for the philosophical aspects, I commonly use nicotine to sharpen my focus towards writing or making videos. I call it, it's an excuse, I know, it's an excuse for why, but I feel that there are certain things about this addiction, if that's what you want to call it, that are good and bad. You can take them with a grain of salt. Like, some of the pros of using nicotine in my eyes are it's a euphoriant, you know. It's something that in any sort of situation, taking a hit off of this would kind of induce this just sort of deeper connection with how you feel towards what's going on, you know. I don't mean like you're at a family dinner and you want to go outside and hit your jewel because you want to feel nicotine in that situation. I more mean like you're chilling to yourself and you're out in nature, or you're trying to write something, and you take that hit of nicotine to kind of spark your mind and really let that stimulation take place, because it is a very stimulating compound. And I've also found, strangely, that when you're coughing off of a hit of cannabis or something like that, the tiniest hit off of my jewel will seem to just halt the coughing right in its tracks. And I don't know if it's something in the juice itself or the nicotine that's doing it, but it immediately pauses this coughing reflex. But that's kind of aside from the point. Some cons of nicotine use I have are basically anytime that I associate me using the nicotine with relieving anger or making a tense situation less tense. Like, say me and my brother are on a topic that's not necessarily comfortable, and we're kind of like butting heads on things. I may find myself just kind of mindlessly grabbing the jewel and hitting it, like as if it's going to relieve some sort of uncomfortability, or like if I get mad at something that's happened in my day and I feel that hitting my jewel will just be a break from it. I don't like those associations, because it's like a impulse. It's like an impulse. Something went bad, I better get buzzed on nicotine, you know what I mean? And another thing is the idea of how you feel like you need it around at all times, you know, like with somebody who's commonly uses nicotine, regularly rather, they can probably agree with me here, where when somebody comes up to them like, yo, you want to go do this today? Or, yo, me and my friends are going to do this, you want to come with us, tag along? The first thing, maybe not the first thing you think about, but one of the things you do on your checklist is think, am I going to be able to hit my jewel today, or get a smoke break, or fit nicotine into the equation somewhere in there, you know? I don't really like when that kind of comes about, where the situations you engage in are based around the availability of the nicotine to you in those moments. I don't like when it gets like that. There are times where I don't want nicotine around. I want to just be and let that feeling not even be a thing to me, you know? But I have a bittersweet relationship with nicotine, I'd have to say. I'm definitely addicted to it, meaning if I was to stop using it, my body would go into withdrawals, and I'd have to say maybe my mind would end up making up some sorts of excuses and things like that to kind of prompt me to go back to using it. Like, it's kind of how I identify when I'm addicted to something, is when there's this weird voice in you that is always trying to justify why it's okay, you know, even though you don't have the money to keep doing this, or it's making you more irritable as a person, or it's taking you out of the moment of your life. There's still something in you that goes, like, you can regulate this, you can make this normal, and that's the nature of it that I don't like. As far as the effects of nicotine that you feel, the psychoactivity of it, I am a big fan of the nicotine high, if that's what you want to call it. But as far as letting it control you, I'm not too fond of that, and I honestly try to limit myself in those aspects of the nicotine addiction dragging you around by the nose and what you do in your day-to-day life. So that's basically it on nicotine usage, my personal experiences with it, what it is, and just the general pros and cons of it. So I hope you got something out of this video. I know I haven't made one in a while. It's because I lost service on my phone, but I got it back, and I kind of want to make some more videos, so I will be back with more later on.